A civilization may last 1,000,000 years, but if it forgets its past, did it ever truly endure? Perhaps a civilization isn't measured by how long it exists, but by how long it is remembered. When I was younger, time capsules were all the rage. It wasn't uncommon for a school to have students put some items and notes in a capsule and bury it for later recovery, and had grown quite popular in the 1970s and 80s, probably at least in part from the Cold War. Those were not the first time capsules. We have many examples back to at least the 1700s. Indeed, one was rather famously placed by Paul Revere and Samuel Adams shortly after the American Revolution. Now today we're defining a time capsule as an item built with an intent of keeping historical information or goods to be passed on to a distant generation, and it will be one of the major concepts under discussion today, as you consider how to preserve yesterday for distant tomorrows. We'll also be examining how you can preserve information, or objects, or people, against both natural events and time, and intentional destruction, those aimed at civilization in its entirety, or even aimed attacks on archives. We'll be discussing how you can do this without some time-freezing stasis device, and also what the impact of such time-freezing stasis vaults would be on a civilization if you did have them. Discussing how civilizations can manage to preserve themselves across deep time is a time-consuming topic, so you might want to grab a drink and a snack. Now to begin our discussion, we probably need to acknowledge that most time capsules are done with the near present in mind. A school might have a kindergarten class bury one with the intent of doing that every year and having them get opened at graduation 12 years later. Nice concept, feel free to steal it, someone's probably already done it anyway, but here the point of burying it is entirely symbolic. A spare locker or shelf in the building somewhere would work as well. Real time capsules meant to last a long time are available online relatively cheaply, and a quick check around the internet shows a decent number of DIY instructions and videos too. And even the cheap ones are going to be higher quality than anything made decades, let alone centuries ago.
I'm guessing the habit of burying them is more of an end-of-the-world concern with the hope of future archaeologists finding them. Sticking stuff a few feet underground is providing radiation and bomb protection, but the risk of making it very likely the capsule is going to get lost. Ideally, you probably want a metal cylinder with an airtight and corrosion-proof exterior, and once you got the material in there, you flush it out with argon or krypton, or some other heavier than air and inert gas, to get all the oxygen and moisture out. It helps to prepare the items going in, too. Obviously, putting a damp sponge in a tube you just went to efforts to purge of moisture is counterproductive. Humans are basically big damp sponges too, and that concept of preparation for storage is going to be a big issue with trying to store people. And not the only one either, as we'll see, even the radioisotopes in your body can wreck things. But the other issue with time capsules is what you put in them in terms of content, and some historians have pointed to the typical time capsule as a very bad example of how to relay info to future historians or archaeologists. Mostly useless junk seems a common characterization, though given how much of archaeology is achieved through studying broken garbage of prior civilizations, that might be seen as a tad bit hyperbolic. The biggest keystone to preservation of information is redundancy. Again, redundancy is critical, because the biggest keystone to preservation of information is redundancy. And as an example, even if we wanted to bypass digital storage altogether, we could print tons of information on thin aluminum sheets containing thousands of pages and wrap them up like a scroll for insertion into a cylinder capsule, and mass mill those things out by the million for literally just tossing everywhere, from sticking in concrete blocks to be used as building keystones, to in tombstones and coffins, to just dropping them in the middle of forests or even actual garbage dumps. If they're all exact copies of each other, then even if 99 out of 100 are never recovered, and all of those are so damaged you can only get one word in 1,000 off them, then with 1,000,000 of them, that still means you have 10,000 copies to compare, so that you can probably get every single word and make a decent guess at the handful that might be missing from every copy by bad statistical luck, since you would have a big Rosetta Stone there to get a feel for that language it was written in. You can, in theory, use this same trick for DNA. DNA decays relatively quickly on geological timelines. Even where a sample like a bone has managed to remain intact, it usually amounts to a practical half-life of DNA of around half a millennia. But even a single bone probably began with 1 billion copies of DNA in there, and DNA is not a random jumble, but meaningful building codes. So if your detection tech is good enough, you could potentially have partial DNA from after many half-lives that could still be reassembled into a good digital reconstruction of the original DNA. And if your knowledge of genetics is good enough, you're going to be able to look at a damaged chunk of a gene and say what it was and fill the blank in from some other organism or just digital DNA reconstruction. Fundamentally, as we've already proven many times, determined investigators with brains and decent technology can reconstruct accurate images of the past from the tiniest and most random and damaged scraps. So anything designed with the intent to preserve information, and by folks who have given some real thought to it, is likely to be successful through preparation and redundancy. Again, redundancy is critical, because the biggest keystone to preservation of information is redundancy. 2 important caveats, though, that we need to discuss in detail. First, some things don't necessarily permit redundancy. I can't make 1 million copies of you for storage, and would need much better technology than we now have to assemble you as you rather than a corpse. We probably can make digital copies of a brain, but those need to be kept as copies on a hard drive rather than run on a computer, or they each become a new and divergent person. Indeed, you might have someone who did this, maybe even scattering copies to many other planets in the galaxy, and several hundred iterations themselves had lived since then, awakened in one place or time or another, and maybe in some cases reassembled from the damaged remains of 12 such drives. That's got some interesting implications about personhood and identity, but that's not our interest for today. Preserving a culture's identity is, and that raises our other caveat. Smart people can find ways to store stuff through redundancy and figure them out far ahead in the future even from the scraps. But smart people can also figure out how to find your stores and copies and eliminate them. Even on a million-year timeline, mass production of preservation canisters for information should be viable. However, 1 million years is a very long time, and it's entirely plausible that in that same period, 3 things will happen repeatedly. First, many will find these capsules early, treasure them, show them off, open them, sell them, seek them out, and so on. Second, many will decide that the best way to extend their longevity is to replicate more of them, adding to their numbers and with canisters that aren't already aged, new ones with longer remaining lives, possibly improved on designs from having seen what tended to fail first, or the information rearranged a bit to make sure the outer layer that always failed first was repeated inside again. Maybe make a few additions to update on what's been going on the last 10,000 years since the originals were made, and 11,000 years too, and 12, because this will be ongoing. Also, we can fix that oops on sheet 214 where there's a typo, or the embarrassing error about the value of Hubble's constant, or add the 2 extra digits to a given physical constant that we found since then. Maybe even remove that embarrassing line of ideological or religious thought that's in there that really is just better forgotten, right?
And that brings up the third repeated action. While a lot of folks will be adding, improving, or slightly modifying the contents with the overall aim of still making sure the core material survives intact in the future, you are bound to have occasional movements come up that want to destroy the things. There are many motives for that, including some more reasonable ones than others, or less irrational anyway. After several thousand years or so of treasure hunters finding the capsules, you will likely have some very detailed notes on how best to find things and what time has done to them, so you can find and destroy them, or better yet, just start making more copies that look aged and contain contrary bits of data. With tons of wrecked and conflicting examples on hand, it makes it easy to eliminate whatever piece of data you think needs to be gone, and over long enough periods of time, you might have had hundreds of such groups arise in different times and places, with different goals for erasure and different methods and success rates. Assume about once a millennia, some group arises that makes a reasonably successful and dedicated effort to destroying or corrupting your capsule or archives. In 1 million years, 1,000 such concerted attempts could have eroded your records heavily through a mix of destruction and alteration. and don't assume radioisotope dating is going to expose forgeries either. We'll return to that later, but they can be forged themselves.
Sometimes on episodes like these, I'm worried that I'm unintentionally authoring the Despot's Manual for Controlling Future Civilizations, and given that the next episode I'm writing after this one is on Roko's Basilisk, I do sometimes get tempted to just zip my lips. But I tend to assume determined despots will not lack in quantity or creativity in the future either, so a handy forewarning for others maybe, which is often the motivation for time capsules and notes to the future anyway. I'm not sure if they're still doing it, but one of my audience members wrote to me a couple years back during COVID that they were doing a time capsule and included copies of all my episodes in there. Though I tend to assume the major reason to keep notes from futurists around into that actual future is either for nostalgia purposes or as a gag reel. One of my objections to psychohistory from Asimov's Wonderful Foundation series is that while outsider historical perspectives can be valuable, you don't need dead hands guiding you from centuries past. You, in the present, will typically be far more familiar with the situation on hand and the options available for dealing with it, though I'd emphasize that one of those options is the wisdom of prior thinkers as well as the mistakes of the past. But as awesome as it would be to have George Washington or Benjamin Franklin suddenly around nowadays, they could not genuinely offer us better insights into handling any of our problems beyond simply that outsider and historical perspective. They would likely be seen by many as having good insights anyway. I would have a real hard time not hero-worshipping Ben Franklin if he showed up today, even knowing he was very out of the loop on current matters and also had his fair share of flaws. As a teen and young man, he and Richard Feynman were my two top role models I aspired to be like, which I think surprises folks who assume it would be Carl Sagan, or Isaac Asimov, or my other namesakes Isaac Newton and Albert Einstein. My middle name is Albert for those who didn't know. My parents met in college and were both physics majors, though my mom had a big thing for computers and went into that later. This was in the 1970s and explains her fondness for Asimov. We love all role models and we love all heroes of the past, and civilizations with advanced technology probably need to be wary of returning heroes gathering more followers than their actual current and useful wisdom might justify. Which returns to the issue of a civilization trying to preserve great leaders or thinkers forward in time by placing them into stasis. I mentioned radioisotopes, and they are a good way of checking things' age, but also a good way of wrecking seemingly stable things and people. As we discussed in episodes like sleeper ships, even the minimal amount of radioisotopes and things like potassium will build up their damage on someone when frozen at low temperatures, as temperature has no effect on atomic decay. Between potassium-40 and other isotopes commonly in our bodies, we give ourselves a lethal radiation dose after a few thousand years on ice. Now, realistically, we would have to have very regenerative technologies to handle turning someone from an ice cube or corpuscle back into a living human, so that's probably not a hard limit to freezer times. It's also very likely that we'll have the ability to process nutrients for hydroponics or onboard spaceships to filter out the radioactive isotopes in favor of the stable ones only, and the same for construction materials. We might do that anyway one day to cut down on radiation sources inside our homes and bodies and equipment. Most of the radiation your body gives off is in sources that a few months of advanced preparation of eating isotope-free foods would remove a lot of. But for any long-term storage, you do need to be thinking about problems like your instruments failing because 1 in a million of its atoms were radioisotopes, and when they decayed over a million years, they damaged several nearby molecules, especially if you make very micro-sized devices where a given component might only be a handful of atoms. This is why big stone megaliths last so well. The material is durable and simple, there's nothing to really damage. Now, an active computer with self-repair capacity doesn't have to worry about time and nature damaging its blueprints or protocols. We have a lot of data integrity methods that, combined with redundancy, let you make a single mutation basically less likely to occur than not in the entire history of the universe. We cannot really build something that lasts billions of years, but we probably can build devices that can self-repair with enough brains and blueprints, and we can choose to make those mutation-free. Our DNA is presumably accidental, and trial and error has no reason to mutate to be less prone to mutating.
People tend to assume that means we can't build little self-replicating robots to be mutation-free, but that's drawing a wild conclusion without considering the numbers. Even ignoring ways we check data for copy errors, like the checksum function, we can use numbers and redundancy here too. Imagine for the moment a bunch of replicating robots that instead of replicating themselves individually, had to bond together with two others to build a new one. They compare code and transfer to the new bot whatever 2 out of 3 of them have, thus making it very unlikely 2 of them would have happened to have gotten the same mutation. Now we scale that up by giving them multiple copies of their own code too, so that one bot already has 3 or 4 copies of a blueprint and can regularly re-examine its own code for inconsistency.
We might assume that somehow, once every million interactions, this trio does have some bit of code where 2 of them agree but are wrong. This could be addressed by having any occasion of disagreement result in a pause while they send out an inquiry to their cousins. Or we could skip on the trio and replace them with 10 needing to come together to agree and not continue without 8 being in agreement, or even 100 with, say, 98 needing to agree, and with the mutants being repaired by their siblings to have the correct code. But to give a context, an event that might cause one self-replicating robot to have a specific mutation over 1,000 years would have the odds of 2 of those bots getting the same mutation in 1,000,000 years, and 3 of them in 1,000,000,000. If you got 1,000,000,000,000 such robots, then it's still happening a few times a day, but when you increase that to needing 10 bots to get the same mutation, you are already in the zone where an entire galaxy full of those bots might not have the mutation occur before all the stars burn out. You work out the odds through calculation and real-world experience and set your level of security to above that. There are, as mentioned, tons of data integrity methods we use nowadays that are already quite capable of handling this problem if we had self-replicating robots or self-repairing machines. So it's not that your archive has to fail inevitably through natural accident, it's an intelligent actor intentionally screwing with it that is the problem. There's also the very legitimate question of why you even need a planetary archive or storage vault. As we've noted in other episodes, the same technology that help you copy a mind digitally or restore a body from frozen states will generally let you keep someone going in good and protracted health indefinitely, rather than needing to store them, so you might limit this for things like dedicated librarians or other guardians meant to limit drift of purpose. This, by the way, is one of the reasons you might destroy an archive or vault. You might have a planet on which some nigh-immortal aristocracy has been running things for millions of years, and benevolent or not, people might want to get rid of them for selfish or altruistic reasons. If you keep everyone's banking records in a vault somewhere, you have someone with a motivation to blow those up or adulterate them. As we discussed in last month's machine monitors, there's a lot of reasons you might want a machine monitoring something which never changed its mind, or got bored or philosophical about its task, even on billion-year timelines. For that same reason, there are plenty of reasons to want to sabotage or hijack that machine. You don't really go over the top with protective measures, which are usually increasingly expensive, unless you think someone out there will want to mess with it. Especially as if no one would, odds are good you don't need some eternal guardian because other people would rebuild it if it broke. It's like a bridge across a chasm. You don't need to make it so it needs no maintenance or replacement, because if it falls down, people have a clear motive and ability to rebuild it, and to maintain it in the first place.
Our planetary archives or time capsules are often meant to be a bridge across the chasm of time, and yet while we can imagine, as science fiction often does, barbaric survivors of ours in the future finding an archive and rediscovering lost science from it, this is honestly not very likely. A lot of it comes to the idea that the great Roman Empire once fell and we lost a lot of technology as a result. But this is something of a false narrative along with the Dark Ages and the tendency to really oversimplify history into bite-sized chunks and stories. Let us assume some technology really was lost though, and note that 1500 years later we have way more technology than they did.
Creative science and engineering ideas are not once-in-a-civilization items that will never be found again. The brilliant men and women who advanced those sciences may have been singular, but their genius was not. A civilization that prizes knowledge will encourage and aid those who seek to find it, and the discoveries of their peers and the environment around them will shape where their journey takes them. Knowledge, once found, is far easier to learn and preserve, and to rediscover. What's really at risk from time is your history and art and stories, and they are harder to preserve as well, because you could write down basically every core piece of science up through the early 20th century in a single book if you needed to. And the entirety of Wikipedia will still fit on a flash drive last I checked, certainly with text only and diagrams. A lot of Wiki really is not terribly important either. Many of the biographies of people or modern companies or organization entries are unlikely to be pivotal to refounding civilizations from the ashes of atomic war. To be fair, I have a bio entry on there too, which is mostly accurate, but then I actually have discussed doomsday and post-apocalyptic scenarios and recovery before, so they might get some value out of that, probably mostly to say, well, that was all wrong. I would hate to see the tales of J.R.R. Tolkien or the poems of Robert Frost lost the ashes of eternity, but it wouldn't be the end of the world if it was. Well, it might have been the end of the world where they got lost, of course. You might not keep your planetary archives exclusively on your planet though, since it could end while civilization might continue, and you probably would want a few official archives and backups so that you could help proclaim which truths were real and which were fabrications by people trying to adulterate history. Though, of course, the official archives might themselves be made of the purest crap propaganda masters could spew out from the bowels of the Ministry of Truth. Nonetheless, lots of planet archives, probably some buried inside icy asteroids so far from the sun it barely was brighter than any other star in the sky, is probably a good place to be keeping archives, along with retaliatory weapons of mass destruction for that matter. Some AI designed for monomaniacal dedication to its task, or even people put into stasis, might make good keepers for an archive like that.
Preserving knowledge isn't just about storage, it's about survival, and sometimes what's preserved is far stranger than we ever imagined. That's why this month on Nebula, we're diving into stories where survival and secrets go hand in hand. In The Sojourn, Nebula's exclusive sci-fi audio drama, survival depends as much on trust and memory as it does on engineering, and in deep space, when one thing goes wrong, it can mean the end of everything. It's a perfect companion to today's topic, and just one of many shows you'll find only on Nebula. And if today's episode has you thinking about humanity's long-term survival in space, you want to check out our episode on mass drivers on the moon, where we look at how future civilizations might hurl cargo off the moon using electromagnetic rails instead of rockets. That's this month's Nebula exclusive. Next month, we'll be going even deeper into the unknown with Dark Biospheres, our August Nebula exclusive, where we explore how alien life might evolve on worlds cloaked in eternal night, planets without sunlight, orbiting rogue worlds or dim stars, with ecosystems that challenge everything we thought we knew about biology. All of that and more is available right now on Nebula, the streaming platform where I post every episode early and ad-free, along with tons of exclusives. You can sign up for $36 a year, or grab a lifetime membership for just $300. No renewals, just curiosity. Head to go.nebula.tv/IsaacArthur and help us preserve the future by learning from the past.
Now, stasis itself is a fairly vague term from science fiction. We usually mean a place where either no time is elapsing, or where stuff just can't move, even at an atomic level, or where time isn't quite stopped but just creeps forward at a snail's pace. This is possible under known science, but very hard, as time does slow around supermassive objects like black holes. In point of fact, it's super-energetic objects, but mass is the type of energy usually making up most of the energy in such objects, though an awful large portion of a neutron star or black hole's energy is in angular momentum and temperature. You wouldn't have an even flow of time on an object unless it was right by a supermassive black hole, preferably right between two of them that weren't quite touching, but you could have tons of micro black holes laid out in a grid, and two such grids laid out in a layer would potentially have a slow time field inside it that was also not instantly lethal to be around. But again, it is energy, not mass only, that does this, and we still understand very little about time and gravity both, so we cannot rule out someone finding a way to make a device that just slowed time in its area, Same as we can't rule out artificial gravity like we see on spaceships in science fiction all the time. Unlike faster-than-light travel or time travel, while we don't have any clear paths to such technologies, we also don't have tons of contrary science and math saying that it shouldn't be possible. This might also be a bit unconventional too, like a portal to a different universe where time just ran way slower than here, akin to hyperspace technologies that circumvent the speed of light by moving to some congruent universe that was smaller or where time ran faster, then translating back to this universe. That slow time version would make a pretty good planetary archive, some huge library in its own pocket dimension where a day passed inside for every century outside. It would be quite a personal sacrifice to venture in that library to try to find something, though it's probably nothing more than poetic to imagine it would be hard copies of books and not some digital archive where the query simply took a millisecond of local time, which at a day-to-century ratio means a millisecond inside would be 6 whole minutes outside. An irritating but hardly unbearable delay. As awesome as Stasis seems in science fiction, its main use there tends to be either preserving people for voyages or preserving some vital relic, like an original copy of the Constitution or a Gutenberg Bible or a rare baseball card with the same bubblegum smell still attached, like we see in the Star Trek The Next Generation episode The Most Toys, where Commander Data gets abducted by a collector of antiquities that rivals the collector from Marvel Comics in obsessiveness, or Trazyn the Infinite from 40K. That is one of the best episodes of Star Trek in my opinion, incidentally, and an example of low-budget bottle episodes where good writing proves that even in sci-fi, special effects are second place to good story and acting. But I digress. While preserving things is handy, there's no real reason to assume a slow time field or stasis field would be hard to maintain or build or costly to operate based on size. So you might have a stasis field big enough to encompass vast warehouses, or indeed have slow time pocket universes in which you could store perishable goods for retrieval. That means you might need to contemplate a civilization that had such casual stasis fields that folks can not only jump centuries ahead in time if they want, but in which food waste from the grocery may be a relic concept because it just doesn't happen. Your fridge isn't even cold, so you can keep your bananas and bread in there for a century if you like, the latter still warm and fresh from the oven. You might freeze entire worlds, particularly for journeys between galaxies, and indeed at high enough speeds, time does slow down quite a lot.
Casual stasis fields, even smaller ones, could have some weird effects too. People who keep their pets in stasis while they are away, so they don't miss any of their time together, or even who decide to raise their kids over a couple of centuries by just having little Timmy and Jane only out on Sunday afternoons, when they got plenty of quality time to spend with them. As a parent, I could feel the appeal of that pretty strongly, especially in a civilization where they were hanging around near their maximum comfortably sustainable population, and folks wanted to get to spend more time with their kids, so just tuck them in on Sunday night, flick the lights and time off, and woke them up for a big fun breakfast the next time they had a day they could commit to spending with them. I honestly don't know if that would be monstrous or good parenting, maybe both, and it might depend on the specifics too. Civilizations staring down the chasm into truly deep time probably have to develop some interesting approaches to handling it, even with indefinite lifespans from nanotechnology, and that might be an example of one way they did it.
You might be able to biologically live indefinitely too, but realistically only be able to experience so much lifetime without going nuts. So if it was 1,000 years, you might pop into stasis for a century at a time and live out 100 millennia that way, by leapfrogging through time. Indeed, that's often suggested in science fiction for relativistic travel near light speed. Alastair Reynolds' masterpiece, House of Suns, works heavily with that theme and really feels like a setting millions of years in the future. I could imagine folks wanting to sabotage such leapfrogging civilizations or individuals too, to erase things from the past or reclaim some property they had and refuse to return to public use or inherit to a descendant. We often say you can't take it with you, but the Egyptian pharaohs might have been ahead of their time, and you might have folks with big-time pyramids going on stasis in them, and folks wanting to pillage all their buried treasures. Deep time is a tricky thing to envision or write. Some of Alastair Reynolds' other works try to discuss it too, so does Frank Herbert's Dune series or Gene Wolfe's Book of the Long, Short, or New Sun, if you're looking for some good summer reading. But it's worth remembering that even that novel, House of Suns, set 6 million years in the future, or Dune, set tens of thousands of years forward in time, are really nothing compared to billions of years. And that is the timeline we really need to contemplate for concepts like stasis vaults or planetary archives, if we really want to consider deep time. In cases like that, you might even consider sending out ships into intergalactic space at 99.9999% of light speed, with the intent of having them turn around and come back a billion years later while experiencing a small portion of that time. Indeed, you might build some massive star-sized archive that just went on this motion over and over again, randomly returning on roughly 100 million year intervals, then broadcasting all their data at a galaxy as they passed by it, absorbing any new transmissions for archiving, then returning down the road again to rinse and repeat till the stars themselves burned out. We even considered trying to store information in the vastly longer black hole epoch that we discussed in our classic black hole farming episode from Season 2.
Trying to store information for trillions of trillions of trillions of years boggles the mind, and yet civilizations might attempt it and could succeed with some of the approaches and technologies we contemplated today. We ourselves might even live to see such a day if certain technologies develop quick enough and permit it. We have a lot of time ahead of us and a lot of history behind us to preserve, and for my part, I think it is worth preserving. After all, those who forget the past are doomed to repeat it, at least its mistakes, while those who remember get the joy of reliving those better memories. Speaking of preserving memories, and before we close out for today, I did want to thank everyone who came by the International Space Development Conference at the end of last month. I don't travel much, so it is one of the few occasions I ever get to meet anyone from the audience, and it is nice to know folks beyond just comments or emails. We had about 200 presenters giving talks at the event on various areas of space-related research, from classic rocketry to space elevators, or AI and mental health in space, and even transhumanism. That includes everything from rising stars still in school to recently retired NASA chief scientist Jim Green, who I had a wonderful chat with about generating artificial magnetospheres and is finishing up a paper on a new method, which I imagine we'll do an episode on. We also had about a dozen astronauts attend, including our Saturday keynote speaker Jared Isaacman, as well as hundreds of international students participating in our competition for designing space habitats. We have a lot of student contests and debates, high school through college, and we are always looking to get more participants, as well as mentors to help with those individuals or teams, and also are always looking for more abstracts for talks or volunteers for helping at the events the National Space Society puts together. Also, if you didn't know, the NSS has its own YouTube page where I regularly contribute videos on. They are shorter than the ones I do here, and sometimes more technical, and I also help produce videos written or narrated by other folks over there too, so pop on by and give it a look and a subscribe. And of course, we have plenty of upcoming content here on SFIA. Make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already to get alerts when those episodes come out. You can also help support our show on Patreon, and let me thank everyone there for their continued support. Until next time, thanks for watching, and have a great week.